I don't get it. I simply don't get the hype around Metroid Prime. It's one of the highest rated games ever made. And there are certain games that you play after the fact that you either get behind the hype or struggle to connect with it. And when I talk about a game that I played years on and fell in love with, I think of Resident Evil 4, specifically the Wii version. That game is aged like fine wine, and when I played it in 2017 for the first time, I loved it. And around that time, I was on a real Wii kick. I was getting back into all the games that I missed on the Wii. So I went on to Metroid Prime, which is another GameCube game that plays better on the Wii. And for the first few hours, I adored it. And I thought I understood why people enjoy the game so much. The world was begging to be explored, there was practically no hand-holding, and everything felt dangerous. I was pulled into the world of Metroid Prime, even playing it over a decade after it released. But then that point hit. The enemies got spongy, there was no incentive to fight them, and backtracking, oh my god, it was off. And if you're familiar with this channel and this kind of series that I do, you know that these videos aren't about crapping on games that people love. In fact, they're actually the complete opposite. This is where I lay out my problems with my time with the game, and call on the hardcore fans to help me understand it. Why do you love Metroid Prime, and how do you best enjoy it? And also, what are your favourite memories with the game? Anyway, with Prime 4 right around the corner, I booted up Metroid Prime to see if I could change my mind about it. This time I played the remastered version on Switch, and this isn't a review or talking about the port itself, but this game looks phenomenal, and I can't fault it from that aspect. I also think it improves the core of the game for one reason, which I'll talk about later. And in true retro fashion, I got a Land of Prime on the Switch from my friend David. So without him, this video wouldn't have been made, and that's why I love physical games so much. Just being able to go to his house, collect the game, pop it in the Switch, and play away. I have so many great memories of lending games to friends, and a lot of horror stories too, of games disappearing or discs getting scratched, but that's a story for another day. So I first loaded in and Samus is going into the space station, and this is the tutorial introduction section. And I had to start by fiddling with the controls because I originally played this on the Wii, and the Wii pointer with the nunchuck is just perfect for first person shooters. And I thought that they would have been the best controls, and I started to mess around with them. I went with the original ones on the GameCube, which kind of feels similar to the likes of GoldenEye, and even though I grew up playing GoldenEye, trying to play that game now or any game with a similar control scheme is just nearly impossible. So instead, I went with the twin stick controls, played it like a normal shooter, and because aiming isn't really that important in this game, the fact that the Switch has the shorter analog sticks didn't really make much of a difference because you can just lock on to any enemy. And that's just easily the most comfortable way to play it because you're not worried about recentering the controls or flicking your wrist around to be able to aim. You're just playing it like a normal game. And Prime doesn't really start until you land on the first planet, and the atmosphere is perfect. And that's why I fell in love with the game when I played it for the first time. Even back then in 2017, I was playing it nearly 10 years on from its Wii release on a really crappy 720p TV. I was using a Wii to HDMI adapter, and it just doesn't look great. It's totally playable with the HDMI adapter, but the conditions I was playing the game under were far from ideal. But even at that, on the Wii, the atmosphere shined through, and that's why at the beginning anyway I really enjoyed Metroid Prime. And since there's no hand holding, you can just jump straight into the game, which I think in hindsight was amazing, because around this time, during the Wii era, is where Nintendo really lost the run of themselves, and games just had stupidly long introductions, and they were holding your hand, and obviously it got worse in the Wii U era, but there was just a point where Nintendo came to the conclusion that the people that played their games aren't intelligent enough to do what we want them to do, so we're just going to hold our hands. And I think obviously Zelda is probably the biggest culprit. Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword have terrible introductions. So being in and around that time and this coming out on the Wii, if I had played it back then, it would have hit me at a perfect time. And it did hit me at a really good time in 2017 too. And now, since having 2 YouTube channels and reviewing games for a couple of years now, I do feel like I think about games a lot differently. So back in 2017, I appreciated the lack of hand holding, but now I appreciate it even more because that lack of guardrails really help you get immersed in this game, because that is the overall lasting feeling with Metroid Prime for me, and I'd imagine many others, is when you land on that planet and that cool music is playing and the visor loads up, you see your cannon, you see the waterfall off in the distance, you see Samus' face reflect off the visor. They perfectly capture that atmosphere, and it's only improved with the remaster because everything looks so much better. The rain bounces off the cannon, which is just really impressive, especially for a Switch game. Like, I'm playing this on the Switch too, and it just looks absolutely phenomenal. But all this brings me on to the aspect that I like the most about Metroid Prime, and that's how the story is delivered to you. I'm not opposed to these narrative heavy games, give you 3, 4, 5 hours of cutscenes, and they're all choreographed, and there's all sorts of motion capture, and you deliver a story through there. But I think the best games deliver story through gameplay and visuals, and that is exactly what Metroid Prime does. As you explore, the visuals tell enough of a story so that the place feels like a place. There's the old statues, there's the ruins of previous settlements, and the greatest thing is that you can engage with the story as little or as much as you want. Because outside of some mandatory scanning things where they might reveal some information, the majority of the story you will not get unless you open your visor and you scan an enemy and you read their journal entry, or you find a piece of lore that you can read. And they understand that you are there to explore a planet. You are not there to be bogged down with dialogue, to be bogged down by some NPC chirping in your ear, to be bogged down by just a load of lore that you have to read. You don't need to read any of it. You can just explore and get the story through the visuals of the planet. And that's where I was reminded of Dark Souls, which is one of my favourite series. And of course, everything has to be compared to Souls-likes nowadays. And I think it was King K, if I remember correctly, that said that he thinks that From Software were inspired heavily with how they do story in Demon Souls and Dark Souls by Metroid Prime. And I would 100% agree with him, because back when I would have played Dark Souls for the first time, I couldn't quite put my finger on why I enjoyed the story or the atmosphere or how the world was built. But now, years on, I realise it is that they understand that you are there to play a game and you can engage in the story as much or as little as you want, and the places feel lived in and you can sense that there's a history there. And I guess that's the reason why I fell in love with the opening of Metroid Prime in 2017, and even now playing the opening hours, it is still top tier. And see, this is where the game design portion of the video comes in, because I think there are a handful of genres that make game design show. You have 3D platformers, which show you what amazing level design and character movement can do. You have survival horror games that show you how to properly balance a game around an economy of rare items. You have spectacle fighters that show you how to keep a combat system consistently engaging by new upgrades or combos or enemy variety. And then you have Metroidvanias. There are a few other genres, but they're the ones that are just coming to mind right now. At the beginning of Metroid Prime is impeccable because of the pacing. Every upgrade is meaningful, and you're rarely more than 30 minutes from an upgrade. And see, they're easy to understand because the visor gives you enough information so that you know that, oh, well, I can't destroy this kind of block, so I need to figure out how to do that. Or there's a purple door, or a white door, or a red door, or a blue door, or whatever, and you can very clearly understand what the game is trying to teach you. And most Metroidvanias have that beginning where you're going from upgrade to upgrade, everything feels new, you're getting introduced to new areas, enemies, different platforming, and they're consistently engaging across that first portion. And that's the part where I love Metroidvanias. And then the rest of the game is what separates the boys from the men. The Metroidvanias that I absolutely adore are the ones that I give up on, and there are a lot of Metroidvanias that I have given up on. And that's because of the dreaded moment, the moment where you get lost and you have to track back from where you came from, only to realise you have to be on the other side of the map. And this is where my contention with Metroidvanias, and specifically Metroid Prime, comes in. You will always get lost in a Metroidvania. That will always happen. And different players will get lost at different points. But when it happens, it's frustrating. And there are a few ways to alleviate the frustration and make it a bit more manageable. In more modern games, you have the likes of markers, so you can mark different walls that you can break, or you have the picture system in Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, where you could take pictures of a room and save it to your map so that you can then have a visual of what that room looks like for when you need to go back to it next. Even though I do have some issues with that system and how rare it was, it's a great innovation. And then there's other ones where you have like a robust fast travel system that makes traversal just that much quicker. Or, and this is probably the best one, is if you have amazing platforming mechanics that make moving around fun. And then the other one, which is more on the Vania end of Metroidvania, is that you have engaging combat or a leveling up system or an upgrade system, so that while you are tracking back, you are killing enemies maybe to get items to upgrade your weapon, or you're killing enemies just to get XP so that you can level up. And the problem is, Metroid Prime doesn't have any of these. When you get lost, you get lost. Then you have to slowly trek back to where you are, and you either have to kill spongy enemies like the pirates or the fireworms, or just run past them and ignore them, which is just as much of a problem because there's just no incentive to engage in combat outside of the mandatory encounters. The traversal is boring because Samus moves slowly. Platforming isn't particularly fun. Rolling around in the morph ball is quick, but a lot of the times, if you need to get through a section, you're going to have to blow open a wall that you've already blown up 5 times, or you're going to have to stick to one of the spider tracks so that you can slowly move across it. And it's like this game is doing everything in its power to make backtracking as frustrating as possible. And that's my main problem with Metroid Prime. And it's roughly around the midpoint where this really happens, where you start to get the invisible pirates, where you have to fight the big ice boss, I forget his name. But that boss is just really spongy, and I think sort of epitomizes everything that's wrong with the combat, where you have to wait to be able to shoot them to deal damage, and the time between being able to shoot them is really slow, and they also just take a lot of hits, so it just grinds the pacing down to a halt. And that isn't even talking about the point where you have to backtrack to get all the artifacts, because once you get to that point, I think that's when Metroid Prime completely loses me, because back when I played it in 2017, I would have easily sat there in the first couple of hours and said, oh, this game is really special, and I can see this becoming one of my top 10 or top 20 games. But then once that midpoint hit back in 2017, I honestly fell out of love with the game. I did beat it back then, but I was like, oh, I probably will never play this game ever again. And then I tried to force myself to beat it here with Metroid Prime Remastered, and I got to roughly the halfway point. Now other things have come up and things have gotten busy, so I didn't really have the time to beat it, but I didn't want to beat it. I didn't have any fun once I got to that point where all the enemies started to get really, really spongy. And that's where the point of this video comes in of, am I doing something wrong? Am I stupid? Why do you love Metroid Prime so much? The remaster is obviously fantastic, and the game is a 10 out of 10 in terms of no hand-holding, in terms of an amazing way to deliver a story, which I believe is actually fairly rich if you do engage in it. And it's just a brilliant way of building this enthralling atmosphere that just captivates you from minute one. But then everything else outside of that, it's just not good. And that's my problem with Metroid Prime.